All right. Welcome everybody to being well. Be well.
Be
Be
well.
well. My first error of the night. Get it over with. We're here, ELJ's Be Well series. And I'm so honored and grateful to be speaking with Kate Jackson tonight about her gorgeous anthology, Relative Strangers, Inheritance, Identity, and the Meaning of Kinship, put out by none other than ALJ Edition. So we're so happy to have you and a bunch of contributors I see
Yeah.
are in the audience today. And welcome to everybody, friends, family, and all. Okay.
Thank you for joining in. Thanks, Diane. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mentioned that this is in Be Well, we don't only talk to authors of books put out by ELJ, published by ELJ Editions, but today we are. And when you first approached us, Kate, with this project, we were thrilled. I know Ariana Del Blaker's vision for ELJ Editions is firmly rooted in giving voice to those who have not had a platform, to bringing secrets out into the light, and to do what we can to get rid of stigma. And this is such an important and timely topic, so that when you came, it was like, wow, yes, 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 yes. So that's our history with you. I want to know a little bit about your history with the project. Like, when did you first think of it? What drew you to it?
Okay.
Take it away.
Um, what drew me to it, not surprisingly, is personal history. Um, when I thought of it was, I would say, roughly 4 years ago. Um, and I see Amy joined in. She might know because she's sort of been with me all along those years. Um, I had started an online magazine about these experiences, and to kind of let people have a voice, not a literary magazine by any means, just a place where people could tell their stories. And in doing that, I saw how much people needed a place to tell their stories and how much they needed community. And so this was just an outgrowth of that. I think it was a natural progression of that. And were you asking about the path to publishing?
That was your magazine, but what made you come up with the idea of an anthology?
Um, the stories in the online magazine are not they're generally not written by writers. I thought it would be interesting to have those kinds of stories told by people who are writers, literary essays instead of just stories. And I know there are so many writers who have these stories. I mean, a remarkable amount of writers and memoirists, well-known memoirists, who have these stories. So I thought that would be interesting, and it would also one of my goals with the anthology, and I haven't quite figured out how to do this, is to reach beyond the community of people who have these stories. So we have adoptees, we have NPs, which for anybody here who doesn't know means not parent expected, so misattributed parentage, and we have donor conceived people. And these stories are important for them because people need to feel seen and heard and have their stories validated. But what I would love to happen would be for these stories to somehow find a place outside of that community so that when people get a knock on the door or an email or a call saying I'm your new relative, that they'll open the door, that they will not be approaching it from a place of skepticism or fear or shame, even though all those things will figure in at some point, but so that they could be maybe more embracing and welcoming. So that's why.
And so you thought of gathering writers, who've had this experience. And I know I have a personal experience with this as well. And so many people do. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really, really incredible. It's really, really incredible, the numbers. Um, how did you go about getting writers to contribute? Like how did you think? I know you said you wanted writers, but what was your process, or how did you envision putting this anthology together?
I initially reached out to people whose work I knew in some form or another and work I admired. And I may have known some of their story, not all of it. And I may not have known their story, but I knew they had one. So I started out that way. And then, as you know, we put out a call for submissions as well and received a lot of stories. I wish I could have used them all. Um, so I'm pretty much just reaching out to writers I admired
Mhm.
that I knew had tales. Some of them, as I said, this was 3 or 4 years ago, and some are still in the project, and others, couldn't, you know, couldn't still be available. But I think they're supporting it. I hope they're supporting it. Um, so that's how. And it is important, as you said, you mentioned you know someone with a story. Um, I think we all know somebody who's plunked down $99 and spit in a tube and found something they didn't expect. And it's not at all surprising because as of 2025, I think more than 45 million people have done DNA tests, and of those, 1 in 4 have discovered an unknown close relative. And by that, I mean a first degree relative, so a father or a sibling. And of all the people who tested, between 1 and 5% have found an unknown parent. So I think we're really at a kind of a cultural watershed, a point where there's been like a seismic shift in the way we define family and the way we create family. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do this. It's a particular moment in time, I think. And as like Henry Louis Gates and his show Finding Your Roots and all those, who's your daddy? There's so many of those things, and people are so interested in genealogy. And another reason is that because people are so interested in genealogy, they're very concerned with lineage and their histories, but they don't understand when we don't know what ours is. So that was another reason I wanted to do this.
Mhm. Interesting. I found out about my own family story before 23andMe, and what was the
So did
ancestry?
I. Yeah, so did I.
Yeah. But since it's just like uh I mean those numbers you were sharing are just, really hard to wrap your head around.
It is. I mean, it's millions. If you do the math on those, it's millions and tens of millions actually. And it means that literally everyone has a story or knows a story. And the thing is, this is not it's not new. Family secrets have been around since forever, and they will continue to, and DNA testing will continue to. And one of the things is that in the past, it was very easy to keep secrets. People who adopted and people who had families through donor conception began their families with the idea that many of them, not all of them, with the idea that they were never going to tell their children. And that's what a lot of them were advised to do. And so DNA testing has exploded that and made it impossible, not impossible, but difficult to keep secrets and to have anonymity. Adoptees are fighting for the release of their original birth records, and donor conceived people are fighting to, get some regulations because it's an incredibly unregulated industry, so that they can all fight anonymity. Because until now, the people who had the children or adopted the children, their secrets were more important than all of our well-beings.
Mhm.
Um, so those are all reasons why I wanted to do this.
Yeah. I'm so glad you did. Um, so you had this kind of vision of bringing writers together, and I imagine you had an idea in your head about what that might look like. Um, how is the actual anthology different from the idea you had going in?
It is a little different in that I expected a little bit more range of positive, negative, good
Mm.
outcomes, not so good outcomes. And the truth is, there were more not great outcomes than there were happy outcomes. I didn't expect that. I thought there would be a little bit more. And when I say happy outcomes, that may sound a little glib. I don't really mean that because none of these stories are entirely happy. I mean, in every story there's a challenge. In every story there's grief. But some stories turn out better than others, and some of us meet. I was super lucky. I have, thanks to my mother's secrets and lies and affairs, she introduced me to 10 relative strangers. And all but one of those, well, no, one is my long deceased biological father, but all but one of the others has been an absolute joy in my life. So I consider that a good outcome, even though I'm not going to say it's easy. Um, but a lot of people, we have stories, some of us here, stories of rejection, a lot of rejection. There's a lot of pain around rejection. There's a lot of pain about not being acknowledged. There's a lot of disenfranchised grief, which is one of the sections, as you know.
Mm,
And everybody here probably knows what that's about, but it's the kind of grief that's not acknowledged
mhm,
socially, and it doesn't come with a lot of support, and there aren't any mourning rituals, and it's hard. There are things like in my case, my biological father has been dead for 20 years. I
mm,
discovered him maybe 10 years ago.
mm,
How do I mourn that? And then there's those of us who have had these welcoming, accepting families like mine. I discovered I had six brothers and sisters I didn't know about. Um, Super welcoming, all of them. And then I added a couple more through the years. But it's very hard to maintain those relationships. And there are a lot of stories about sort of secondary rejection, and there are stories about just how difficult it is um, to even when people want to connect with you, it's just hard to connect with people whose lives you haven't shared. And there's grief around that. There's grief like with my brothers and sisters. There's grief around the fact that I didn't get to grow up with them. I know them now. They're lovely people. They felt like family instantly. Um, and I didn't get to have all those years with them. And two of my newly discovered sisters died in the last few years, and there's a whole other kind of grief, and that's not uncommon. There have been several stories by people who have told me. One, Laura Jenkins, who's not here, she delayed and dithered about whether she should reach out when she discovered that she had misattributed parentage, and she finally, after years, decided she was ready to do it. And her husband tried to help her, and it turned out that her biological father died 2 days before. Those stories aren't uncommon, so they're hard stories. There's every emotion under the sun. There's grief and loss, and the pain of rejection and the joy of connection. And there's identity disruption, which I think is probably the hardest thing for most people. There's this sense that when your life is upended by these secrets, that everything you ever thought you knew about yourself is gone, and you have to reconstruct an identity, and you have to redefine your ideas of family. And that's hard work. Um, it's hard work, and it takes years, I think. And on top of that, there are I'm kind of looking here to see if there are any of our therapists among us. Um, there aren't a lot of helping professionals. There aren't a lot of therapists and other professionals who are trained to deal with these kind of losses. And sometimes these losses are unsettling and destabilizing temporarily, but for some people, it's traumatic for a long, long time. And they don't have any places to find help except for groups like Erin has, a group. There are a lot of private Facebook groups, and there are the podcasters, and there's that support, but there isn't the professional mental health um, support out there. So
yeah. And the identity piece that you spoke about, I experienced personally as well. That okay, so this was the family. This is what I thought. This is what I built. This was the foundation of my life.
yeah,
What can you believe in this world? And then boom,
yeah.
it's gone. And then how do you? There's no ground to stand on.
And that's the phrase that so many people, it's interesting that so many people in this situation use the same terms, and those are they feel untethered, and they feel unmoored, and they feel like a trap door opened, and the rug was pulled out from under them. It's a very shocking kind of,
Mhm.
um, earthquake-like feeling. And where do they turn for people to understand them? And often their families don't understand them. Even the families they were raised in don't understand. And that's hard. That's just really hard.
There are just so many layers of grief.
Yeah.
So many layers of complicated, very complicated.
Very complicated. There's that identity piece. Um, maybe some of the others can tell me if they disagree, but I do think that's the hardest part because it takes a lot of time and work and confusion to figure out, people get this discovery and the first thing is who am I now? You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that, who am I now? It's in a number of our stories. And the hardest thing with that is, and one of the first pieces I wrote about this when I had this experience, I wrote a story called, I think it was 10 Things Not to Say to Someone Who's Had a Not Parent Experience. And I think it's been read at this point by like 40,000 people. And they're all like, yeah, that's right. And those are things like the people will say, and I know Aaron's going to nod at me when I say this, your dad's still your dad. Yeah, some of us, our dads are still our dads, but in fact, some of us, they're not. Some of them cut you off. Some people never had a good relationship with their dad in the first place. And they'll say, did you have a good life? Then what difference does it make? Why do you need to search? There's so much lack of understanding. And there's a term called genealogical bewilderment, and there's a psychiatrist, what's his name, H.J. Sants, I think his name was, back in the 60s, and he coined that term to describe the confusion and the longing and um, the almost desperate need to find your biological family, to see someone who looks like you, um, to see yourself mirrored back in the world. And it's just very, very misunderstood, I think. Um, and that boggles my mind because it seems so obvious to me that it would be important. Like I said, if all those people who want to know their genealogy get it, why can't they get it for the rest of us? And I think that genetic identity, it matters. And if you have genetic privilege and you take it for granted, you don't get why it matters to those of us who don't have it.
That's right. So before we started, we connected a little bit before, and I asked you if there was anything you especially wanted us to cover in the interview, and you mentioned two topics that I would love for you to delve into as well. The first deals with, and I'm going to use your words, quote, the importance for adoptees and people with misattributed parentage telling their stories and sharing their truth and the difficulties associated with doing that. So
Okay.
why do you think that is so very important?
I think it's important for a whole bunch of reasons. The first and I guess most obvious is, and I may have mentioned this before, is to help other people feel seen and heard and to let them know you're not alone. Because even now, I think when this happens to someone, despite all the resources that are out there, because they don't know about them yet, if it just happens to them, and they're like, wow, I don't know anybody else this ever happened to, even though there are hundreds probably, but there's a sense of aloneness and a sense of, I don't know where to turn. So these stories, I think, validate people's experiences. And that's one reason. A maybe bigger reason is that um, adoptees and NPEs are asked to carry their truth silently in many cases. Don't tell your story. It's shame and it's secrets, and they are silenced and stifled, and that's very painful. And there's a great deal of research suggesting that keeping secrets is harmful to your mental health. It's harmful to your physical health. The burden of secrets, and that's another important reason. And it's a way to step into your truth. And it's not easy to do for all those reasons. Our families often don't want us telling these stories. I'm really lucky. Well, this is going to sound awful the way I just phrased that, but my mother's been dead a long time. My dad died like 8 years ago. I don't think any of my brothers and sisters would have any issue with anything I write. But that's a luxury a lot of people don't have. Their parents are alive. Their parents don't want these stories told. It's very hard to tell these stories. But once they do, I think it's a really strong way to help people kind of begin to rebuild their identity. And it's a way to educate mental health professionals. It's a way to kind of reclaim the narrative. That's always been a thing for adoptees because adoptees have a longer history of people trying to talk for them, talk over them, tell them they should be grateful. They tell MPs they're selfish, all of these reasons. And one example I can give you about a lot of those things, I want to back up for a second though. I neglected to mention among the reasons important is medical history. And that's a very important part of this secrecy is those of us who grew up in not knowing our biological families grew up with a different and erroneous sense of what our medical risks are. And that's another weird statistic. 64% of people who take tests find out their medical histories are not what they expected. And that means we're not getting early diagnoses, we're not getting preventive care. Um, people die because of this. Um, I can tell you a story about an adoptee I know of who was mountain biking with his friends and he had a what they call widowmaker heart attack. And
Mm.
he had a sort of a spiritual experience in the middle of all this. And I don't know if he had a near-death experience, but he heard a voice saying, find your family, find your biological family. And he did. And when he did, he found out that his father had died of that same kind of widowmaker heart attack, and four brothers were at risk for it and may also have died. Or there's Denny Shapiro, for example. She's recently gone through a really serious eye disease. Turns out that her donor father had the same disease, and had she known that in her youth, she may not have been losing some vision. Um, but there's one of our contributors, and I'm not going to name her because I didn't ask her permission to say this. Um, but she circles around a lot of these things, including the health issues. Um, and I talked to her a couple nights ago, and she told me that when she wrote the essay and she turned it in, and she may be cursing me. I came back to her and I said, "Go deep, dig deeper." And she's like, "I'm sobbing and I'm writing and I'm sobbing, and you're telling me to dig deeper." And I said, "Yeah, go a little deeper." And she turned in a new draft, and I said the same thing. And I know it was really hard for her to write the story, but once she did, she told me that over time, it's been, a few months now, I guess, she started to feel lighter and she started to feel more herself and she started to feel more confident. And what I found even more interesting is that she said other people are noticing it, which not only means it shows, but also that she's talking about it. She's talking about it to other people and they're seeing it. So that's why I think it's so important.
Mm. Thank you. Um, why is it critical that we know where we come from and who our biological parents are? Why is there such a need to search?
I I
Yeah.
think that's what I meant earlier about genealogical bewilderment. I think, and maybe it's impossible to really truly explain to anybody who hasn't been there, but it just, I can't imagine a person who wouldn't have curiosity, maybe
Hmm.
desperate curiosity about who their parents are. Um, so I'm actually, I asked you to ask that question, but I'm not sure that I can truly answer it. It just seems fundamental to me. It seems like a fundamental need and a fundamental right to know your origin story. I mean, everybody has an origin story, except some of us, and um, in my case, my mother took my origin story with her when she left, when I was an infant. I don't know when I was born. I don't know any of that stuff. It matters. It just matters. Um, in ways that maybe some of the rest of us can explain, but it matters.
I think about that. I mean, it absolutely matters. I wonder what the hope is. The hope is around finding those answers. And once you do, was your hope realized?
And that's a great question. Um, and I think it varies enormously. I think there may be some people for whom all they need is the story, or all they need is a photograph. And there are other people who want a relationship. And we can't guarantee a relationship. And I think people go into it most of the time knowing that, but still horribly disappointed if, they find a father who says, I don't want to know you. Super painful. How do you get over that? That's really hard. So I think the expectations vary a lot, but I think maybe in the back of most people's minds is the hope of developing a relationship. I can tell you that a lot of people, both adoptees, MPEs, I'm sure it's the same for donor conceived people, spend a lot of time looking in mirrors, and mirrors show up in so many essays, and they look to find something that reflects back to them who they are. And then
Mm.
when they do discover who they are and they look and they go, oh, there you are. I see you. Um, the moment I saw a photo of my biological father was stunning. I mean, it was impossible to describe. And it was like, oh, everything makes sense now.
Wow.
It all makes sense. Um, that answer your question? I'm not sure if it did.
But I'm still like that, that what you just said, I think is so true of so many family secrets that once you find out the truth, oh, that makes sense now. Everything makes sense
Yeah.
now. Yeah, and so much more so in this situation.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us revise our histories. One thing I didn't mention is that not everyone, but a lot of people just have some sort of intuitive knowing that something is not right. They don't know for sure. They don't have a clue. They don't think they're not from their family, but something's off. I felt that way. And it never occurred to me to think I wasn't my dad's daughter, but I always felt that I didn't fit in that family and something wasn't right. And so these things validate that feeling as well. That's a big,
Absolutely.
big
Whenever
thing.
there's a secret, there is an underlying knowledge that
Yeah.
there's a secret.
Yeah. I told someone recently, in fact, one of our contributors, that when I discovered that my father wasn't my father, actually before I discovered it, I was sort of hoping that the test would go that way, which is a really weird thing to say and probably sounds very strange to someone. And when it turned out that he was not my father, it was sort of I was sort of elated and not I adored my dad, he was the best, but because it made sense to me, it suddenly was like this makes sense to me.
Hmm.
And other people definitely don't have that reaction. I don't hear that too often. I think more often it's a traumatic reaction. And mine was traumatic until I spent maybe 18 months trying to figure out who my father was. And those discoveries happen faster now because there are more people in the databases,
Hmm.
luckily. But in past years, it took a long time.
Um, what have you learned from editing an anthology?
Oh, wow. What a hard question. Hmm. Um, Apart from the fact that it's hard to wrangle writers, I see those of you who've done it nodding your heads. Um, wow, that's a tough question. I think that I've learned how willing people are to be vulnerable and to dig into their stories. And if you just ask them, if you just ask someone to tell their story, and they're grateful for it too. Um, and you would think that it's a lot of work to encourage people to do that. To me, I'm one of those people that I hate asking for favors. I don't like asking things of people. And doing that was really hard. And people were so willing. Amy, I'm going to call you out if you don't mind, because when this first started 3 or 4 years ago, or however many years ago, um, a short version is I did the typical querying agents and going through all that, you know, fresh hell that that is. And I had one agent get in touch, and it turns out she was adopted, and she was absolutely thrilled, and she was so excited, and she said, okay, I wrote like a 70-page proposal and poured my heart into it, and she comes back and she says, okay, can you get me chapter summaries? I'm like, how am I going to do chapter summaries of stories that don't exist yet? So I reached out to all these writers who at that time had been willing, to contribute, and they were lovely, and they said, okay, I can write about this. And I went back to her, and months are going by in between all these things. Like months are going by, and she gets back to me and she says, I'm thrilled with this. This is wonderful. Can you get me some sample essays? And like, how am I going to ask writers to do the labor of coming up with a sample essay? And Amy, the reason I'm calling her out is no question, sure, I'll do that for you right away. Um, and she and I have only met once, I adore her, but it's not it's not like we have a 20-year history. And she just did it. She did it. And two other writers did it. So if you ask people to help you tell a story and to tell their story, I think that's probably the main thing I got out of it. And that's a good feeling. It's a good feeling to help bring these stories into the world.
Wonderful. So you said you started out saying, "Oh, your hope is, and I don't know how to do it, but your hope is to bring these stories to a wider audience." And I'm just gonna say, you're doing it. How do I do it? You're doing it.
I hope
You're
so.
doing it. You're doing it.
So
Um, what are your hopes for the book?
that's my biggest hope. That is absolutely my biggest hope. But beyond that, my next hope is that it encourages other people to tell their stories, that it encourages more people to stand in their truth, and that it encourages more people to open the door. That's really my, you know, Like I said, I was lucky, but I've heard so many stories of people who their messages weren't answered, the doors weren't opened. Um, you know, it's hard to describe that kind of pain, to be so disregarded and unacknowledged. Is unacknowledged a word? Unacknowledged by the
Mhm.
people who gave you life. I mean, it's just unimaginable. So those are my biggest hopes that, as I said in the introduction, it's my hope that it will make relative strangers just become relatives, and not strangers.
It's
Um,
beautiful.
Hi, Michelle. I was just talking about you.
I'm so sorry I'm late. I just forgot.
Well, we
We
are
are
recording
recording
it.
it.
We are
We are
recording.
recording.
You'll
You'll
get to
get to
hear it.
hear.
Yeah. Okay. So is there anything you want to share, Kate, before we open it up for questions?
Yeah, yeah, there is. Um, it's a little bit of a shout out if you don't mind. You and Ariana, obviously, for that excitement and enthusiasm that you had right from the start. Casey, you know where this is going. This would not have happened without Casey. And I couldn't be happier. I was about to give up on this project after all of that agent nonsense, and then realizing I need to look at small presses, and at some point, I got laid off my job, and then this was no longer my priority. I had to kind of work on creating a second act, and Casey said, I know somebody who might have some advice for you, and that somebody was you, and that made this project happen. So there's that, and all these contributors who were just so generous, um, and Laura who helped me proofread.
Okay, thank you. And Casey, I want to thank you too for
Well,
sending.
I just have to say, I am almost as excited about this as Kate and you are. And, when she said, "Oh, I'm just going to put this on the back burner," my just, visceral reaction was, "No, you're not. No, no, we can't let that happen." So, I didn't need a shout out, but it makes me so happy. It is that, what I'm talking about. That's literary citizenship, right? Like we want each other to succeed. And so I'm just thrilled that everything worked out as well as it did. I cannot wait for the book.
Well, thank you. And there were two people, you and Amy here, are real champions and of putting people together and doing those things that lift people up and move their projects along. And I'm just really grateful for
Isn't it just, I mean, I find these anthologies, it just becomes like a love fest.
that.
Like people just are so happy to share, share with each other and put it together and share with the world. And it's just such a heartwarming kind of experience.
It is. When I went to Erin's retreat in New Jersey, was that last month? I don't know, 2 weeks ago, 3 days ago. Um, on my way back, I was in New Jersey, and on my way back, I was coming through Philadelphia, and there happened to be three contributors there. And one of them couldn't make it, but I met with Ona Gritz and Gabrielle, who's here. And I don't know if it was you, Gabrielle, or if it was Ona who said that, well, maybe it was Ona, who said that anthologies are community builders. And I
Mhm.
think that's really true, as you just said. I think that really, is
So
a
true. Just
bonus, great bonus.
and huge shout out to Ariana, with
Yeah.
her and her vision and this beautiful press. I have full faith that you would have published this book someplace, but we're very grateful that you published it here. So yeah.
I'm a big believer in serendipity, and all of this, including all my family discoveries, all happened through serendipity. So, and,
Okay,
you know,
go ahead.
and you and Ariana was willing to say yes, go ahead.
Yes, happy to say yes. Okay, let's open it up for questions. Anybody have a question or a comment or anything they want to share?
What I miss? Just kidding.
You know
You
all
know
the
all the
stories.
stories.
That's funny. Michelle and I did one of her Substack recordings the other day. So you know all my stories. Can I toss out a question, Diane, for a couple of
Sure,
minutes, if any of the
sure,
contributors
please
here want
do.
to answer? The question you asked me about why it matters and how does it feel to tell your stories. Are there any of you who want to comment on that? Oh, Gabrielle.
Okay, I'm going to lower my Zoom hand. First of all, thank you. Thank you, Kate, for building this community and for all of us. And thank you, Diane. It feels like such an honor. This is my second time being in an EJL anthology over the last year. So it's been amazing. And to the importance of telling our stories, I think that I mean, you spoke to this, but I think when we give ourselves the permission to be vulnerable humans, we give each other that permission and we lift up each other's stories. My story is a little bit different because it's about family broken up by war and my mom's missing sister. And I think when you said that everyone has really everyone has some kind of story. There's so many different circumstances why.
Yeah.
And so much shame, so much shame. I know that was such a big part. And, it was a very healing experience when my mom and her sister found each other.
So many stories. And I'm not calling you out to have to say anything, Sarah, unless you wanted to, but you had a double story. So there are so many stories even within one family.
I said I was gonna say like some other contributors in the book. I know who my biological parents are. That was not an issue, but that later on, I think I was 24, 25 years old, I found out that I had a sister I didn't know existed. But I had always felt something was off. That there was, as Diane was saying earlier, when there's a secret, you don't know it intellectually, your body knows it.
Right.
And then maybe about 10 years after I discovered that I had a sister, we found out that my mother had a sister that she didn't know about. So yes, that's my story in the book. But I'm so excited to read all these other stories and excited to be part of this project. So thank you. I completely agree about this sense of community and lifting up each other's stories and moving these stories from secrets, into the light.
Into the light that and I think somebody said that shame can't exist in the light. So that's yet another reason. Funny thing I forgot to mention is one of our contributors who's not here, Nina Lichtenstein. She is an example of how common these stories are because when Diane told me that I could put out a call for submissions and I put it out on Facebook, the next day I got a message from Nina and she was like, oh my God, she had just come home from Norway where she'd been she had a reading for her book, her new memoir that had come out. She said, the first thing I saw was your call for submissions. And she said, you're not going to believe what just happened. She's at her book signing and a woman comes up to her and actually kind of hesitates. And Nina's like, yes, who are you? And the woman's, I'm your sister. It's like, oh my God, she had no idea. So you just, every time you turn around, there's one of these stories. Diane, I've lost you from my screen.
I'm here.
Oh, are you?
Yeah. I think we move around depending on who's talking.
Can't find you. Oh, there you are. Anybody else have any thoughts about what they're doing their essay did for them or how it felt? Everybody's
I
bashful.
think to your question around the why it matters. I think for me, I always talk in terms of a puzzle piece, that it was like the last puzzle piece that I was able to fit in. And so I think about, the tropes around belonging and wholeness, but it did feel like things clicked into place. Even as I didn't know everything, I felt that I had knowledge that I could finally make meaning. And I think as humans, we are meaning makers, and that's the essential.
Yeah.
That to not know is to be able to unable to make meaning. And so I think it's the meaning making piece for me that really, even though I don't know shit, I mean, I know a lot more than many, but of course there will always be, and every human has that experience. We don't all
Yeah.
know everything,
Right.
but to finally be able to put those pieces together really felt like the reclamation was finally beginning.
See, I love that word reclamation. I'm glad you brought that up. I think reclamation is a terrific word for all these stories. And I agree. I think meaning making is one of the top things. And it's not necessarily that it's the truth, but it's the truth that we create for ourselves. Which kind of raises a question that maybe some of you have been asked. I know there's a lot of disagreement about this, but did any of you think that writing is cathartic or healing? Yeah, Amy?
I definitely, a lot of writers say, I don't know what I think until I write it. And that's definitely true for me. And also, I can say, like, the process of putting this all in its place actually made me like myself more because I was just sort of adrift, and I couldn't find my place in my history. And once I could, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. And it's so hard to articulate, and that's why it takes many, many books to try to articulate it. And that's why I like to talk to people on my Substack about it, because it's such a huge change that no one sees. You just feel it inside. And it's really something and ineffable.
You're putting an underscore on something that I said earlier because I told another story about that. Got an echo on this one. Amy, was there something you wanted to say about that?
I'm going to mute myself. I think we get the echoes when there are too many people unmuted. So,
Okay. Go
I
ahead, Amy.
think that's right. I was going to say, both to Dana's point and Michelle's point, I think that there is some reclamation for me too, because I wrote that essay, and thank you for all your kind words, Kate. I wrote that essay about 10 years after what happened. And what it was is that I had reunited with my biological mother, and then she died very young, and I had been in touch with her family. And at her funeral, they refused to acknowledge who I was. And I was her spitting image. I mean, you talked about pictures, right, Kate? Like the first time I look back at the pictures of the day that we met, and people came up to us in the restaurant we had lunch at and said, "You must be sisters." She was only 16 years older than me. So, but they said, "Oh, she's a family friend." And I put up with it. And kept them in my life because I just wanted anything that I could have. We were so deprived. Like you talked about disenfranchised grief. I just was like, I'll take it, I'll take it, I'll take it, I'll take it. And then when I wrote it, I was like, I cannot be in touch with these people. They couldn't, they didn't have, they couldn't acknowledge what everyone in the room knew. Everyone. Um, and it was so shameful that I just buried it, right? Until I wrote about it and said, I don't have to, I don't need that. I miss her, and there are other ways for me to remember her than being with these people who clearly do not care about me. And I am still the dirty little secret in the family. But it took writing it to, I teach a lot of personal essay, and I love the quote from Dinty W. Moore's book on personal essay, where he says, like, if we knew what we were going to say, we wouldn't need to sit down and write it. And that if you're not surprised by something that comes out in your essay, you're not done. And I think about that all the time. And that's what I got out of this one.
And do you see that same thing in your students? I know you teach adoptees.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I have taught adoptees one in particular who's a Korean adoptee who never searched, never did anything, and then found out that she was part of that whole a thing that came out a few years ago about Korean adoption, and she has since found out a lot more, but she never, she didn't even think about um, that she was born somewhere else, right? And that she knew that she was other, like we all have said. Um, but I think actually starting to write about how othered she really felt led her to investigate what little there was, documented about her birth. And it turned out that, she got an apology from the Korean government.
Really?
And she has since been there, and it's really been it's been quite a journey for her.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I like thinking that, that having that opportunity to be in community with other adoptees and former foster folks and NPEs allowed her to just sit with it for a while and think about what she wanted to do.
Yeah, that's another aspect of community, which we're going to be talking tomorrow about that. But I think community is really important. And when all the people who discovered they were NPEs, I think adoptees had community earlier, and they discovered the Facebook groups and they discovered the help. Suddenly there was that sense of being held up by other people. Yeah. Anybody else? Amanda.
I think I'm struggling with all of this. Writing this essay was very hard for me. I've written plenty in the past, and it has been cathartic and made me feel like I could empower, like I was empowered to tell my story. This particular essay, as Kate can attest, I wanted there to be a bow at the end of it, and I really fought hard for there to be a happy ending, and my happy ending wasn't there right then. Of course, like a couple months later, things got better and there could be a corollary, whatever. But I think I'm curious to read the rest of the anthology, especially now knowing that not everybody that the majority were less than happy endings for now. But I'm definitely wrestling with, and I'm not proud to put a non-happy ending out there.
Are you wrestling with the vulnerability of putting your story out there, or with?
I think so. Yeah, I haven't as much in the past. This one feels like an admission of failure, that I couldn't get my siblings to be on the same page with me. Donor conceived siblings, technically we're all in the same boat, but And so it ebbs and flows, there are other things that have brought us together, with some of us together since, but I think that's it. I think the essay that I have in there is a snapshot at a really dark place, and finalizing it or like crystallizing it in that way, that's heavy for me.
Yeah. Or do you have concerns about people reading in your family? I mean, I know you used names that were not
No, I don't think so. I think, in a jubilant alternate world, I would send a copy of this to each of my siblings and all of my family members who I'm still in touch with. And, I would be proud. And I think I'm not hiding, but certainly the calls for promotion right now, I'm struggling with.
Oh, I understand that. In fact, I'm seeing that Joj wrote a couple of comments in the chat about that same thing and she wrote a beautiful essay about sort of the fantasy some of us create about who our parents might be. And, they have that same concern. And I get it. It's hard. As I said, it's been easy for me, but I think that's a very hard thing to put yourself out there.
And I don't want to undercut the importance of the community that this does foster, and my gratitude for the opportunity, because I feel it. I'm just grappling.
Yeah, and I think people have to take it to the level they can take it and no further, because if you're not ready to do that, it can probably be more damaging than it can be helpful.
Absolutely. And the same goes for a lot of personal essay. When you include anybody other than yourself, which we all have to, writing personal essay because we live in the world with other people. Um, it can be really tough, but I think the difficulty or I don't know, like I know George Wright wrote what is she scared, fear. The is probably very, very big for a lot of people in this situation.
Absolutely. And it's not unfounded. I mean,
Yes.
there are consequences. There's
Absolutely.
essays in the anthology about some really dire consequences of telling your story. And I guess once they're out there, they're out there, but it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of bravery to do
So
that.
I wanna salute every contributor to this magnificent anthology. I am one of the lucky ones who got to read the whole thing already. I can tell you you will love it. And really it's very important. It's very special. We're very grateful. And
I'm grateful
thank you. Thank you all.
for all of you.
Thank you all. And thank you, Ariana.
Yeah.
Anybody have anything else before we wrap up?
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, for sharing your stories, for supporting the people who share their stories. And be well. Be
Thank
well.
you, Diane.
And we're gonna have our next Be Well. I'm not 100% sure who we'll be interviewing, but it will be either probably the end of the summer or beginning of the fall. And everybody here made this one so special. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Diane.
Thank you,
Bye,
Diane
everybody.
and Kate.
Sure, I'll be seeing you all again. I hope.